welcome to TSNN's monthly webinar series. In today's webinar, Mr. Tom Singer, the conference catalyst, will talk about creating wow ideas for your next event. Please submit questions for the speakers by typing your questions into the Ask a Question box at the bottom of the media player and hitting Submit. They will be addressed in the last 10 to 15 minutes of the webinar. Alternatively, you can join the conversation and ask questions on Twitter by using hashtag TSNN. Now, Arlene Shows, Marketing Manager for TSNN, would like to say a few words and introduce our sponsor today.
Greetings, everyone. Thanks for joining us today for TSNN's complimentary webinar series, where we continue to offer valuable content on a monthly basis to our subscribers. We'd like to thank OnStream Media. They continue to help us deliver these educational topics to you. OnStream Media is credited with delivering the first video webcasting and streaming presentations over the Internet in 1993. Nearly 20 years later, the company has grown to now deliver over 8,000 live events per year for over 75% of the Fortune 100 and nearly 50% of Fortune 1000 companies. The company's latest innovation is Marketplace 365, a leading virtual event and online community platform that is specifically designed for today's trade show organizers, publishers, associations, and enterprise clients. We welcome you to poke around in the marketplace after the conclusion of today's webinar. And now on to Tom Singer, our speaker today. TSNN understands the value of social networking, especially at a live show. And Tom Singer is an expert at this. He works with meeting planners and conference organizers to set the tone for an event. His presentations educate, inspire, and motivate attendees to engage deeper in an event and make meaningful connections. He has the ability to turn average prospecting into impactful networking, and he has a knack for creating long-term, mutually beneficial relationships which lead to business, more business. He has worked in sales and marketing capacities at several Fortune 100 companies and regularly speaks to corporate audiences, law firms, and professional organizations. You can learn more about Tom, the conference catalyst, at www.tomsinger.com. The entire TSNN team would like to welcome Tom and thank him for taking time today to educate and inspire us as we all learn some fresh ideas for creating a wow experience at our next event. Welcome, Tom.
Thank you. It's good to be here. So as she said in the introduction, I am not a meeting organizer. I'm not a meeting consultant. I actually make most of my living speaking at events. And last year I spoke at 58 different events around the United States and actually beyond. And so I like to come in when I talk with meeting planner groups and say, this isn't what I do, but I do have a marketing background with a large company, and I have probably planned close to 100 different events from small to large in my career. And I'm an observer. I love to watch what people are doing that are just a little bit different and see how we can make the whole meeting experience a lot better. And so hopefully some of what I've observed and my opinions will inspire you to say, hey, it's not that hard to really find ways to make events more, wow, when it really comes down to that. But you have to start by really in the early planning stages with everybody who's involved. You really have to start and know what is the purpose really of the whole event. Sometimes I think in events we get sidetracked as to, what is the purpose. So even as a speaker, when I come in, I don't just fly in, give a speech, and leave. My program usually is weaved into the whole multi-days of the conference because my purpose isn't just to give some ideas and get on a plane and go to the next venue. My purpose for being there is to really inspire and show people how they can make better connections with other people. And part of the way I have to do that to be effective is I have to do it by example. So I have to be at all the happy hours. I have to be at all the meals. I have to sit around at night at the bar with some of the attendees and constantly be ready to change the advice that I'm giving throughout the conference because every conference is a mini society. And you can't force a society. You can't tell a society how to behave. It happens organically. Now, this begins early on online, and it works its way through to go on after the conference. But for those 3, 4, 5 days when everybody is on site at a venue, that mini society has a life of its own. And what we really, I think we want to do is wow people. But if we want to wow people, we really have to know, is that our purpose? What is the purpose? And I think everybody has a different purpose. I can't tell you what the purpose of your event is because I'm not planning your event. It's not core to my organization. I'm a vendor when I go in and help people, so I can't really decide what is that purpose. But I often think we don't ask the question enough. I think we get caught in sort of the cookie-cutter conference mentality of, this is what we do every year. Every February we have a conference that involves a ballroom, a bunch of breakout rooms, some sleeping rooms, some meals, and it just sort of starts to follow along, always being the same. Now, there's certain things you can't change. We can't just say, we're going to have our conference out in the field 4,000 miles from society, because where's everybody going to sleep? Where are they going to eat? Where are they going to use the bathroom? So we have some things that always have to be similar and the same, and that is oftentimes the venues, maybe the location of the country, different things that we do. But when we really boil down and keep saying, what is the purpose? And once we know why we're planning the event and what our purpose really is, every question that comes up can be answered very easily, because we can go back to, does this help advance our purpose or does it not advance our purpose? And so when we really know that, it helps. So I always ask people to start off, do you even care if you do a WOW event? I've worked with some people who I honestly don't think they care. Sometimes they say they care, but I really don't think when they really get down to their soul, to their gut, that they care if their event is spectacular, as long as it reaches that line of good enough. And that's okay, but just be honest with yourself that good enough is all you need to accomplish. Ask yourself, who really wins when the people in the audience are fully captivated by the event? Who is it who benefits from that? And then we have to remember, as we look at coming up with new ideas and fresh ideas, that not every idea is good for your event. Not every single idea that's out there or that's being utilized by every conference, not every good idea is the right idea for your event, because your mini society that is created when you bring your people together, your mini society is unique. So you have to take that into effect, is will it work? Because you can't force an experience on people. You can't put a bunch of people in a room and have a band or a comedian or some sort of an activity and say, dang it, you're going to have a good time tonight. You can't force that experience. It has to happen organically. Another thing that I dwell on a lot is that learning is not enough. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. But so often people say, well, our purpose is providing high-content education. Content, content, content. Well, if that was true, you wouldn't need to hold a conference. All you would need to do is put together some really great white papers and send them to people, and they could sit home and read them. There are other ways to deliver content than by bringing people together. So it is not just the content. But we get fooled. We get fooled by the content, because when we do surveys, we ask people, what do you want? They say content. We'll talk a little bit about that. And then finally, if you know your purpose, and that purpose aligns with the purpose of the people in the audience, and if you hit it out of the park and it's a wow event, they'll come back. They'll come back next year, and they'll tell their friends. We all know that we've been through a rough economy, and the meetings business has been hit pretty hard. It's hit every segment of the meetings business, and yet there are dozens of conferences that have grown, that have really impacted. I live in Austin, Texas. South by Southwest grew by something like 24% a year over the last 2 or 3 years for their interactive portion, their business and tech and social media section of their conference. From 2009 until 2012, it has almost doubled in size in that amount of time. And when you think about it, that's the worst part of the economy. Everybody was saying nobody's going to conferences, but people had wow experiences, and so they come back. But we don't want to get caught up in the whole thing of new for the sake of new. I'm a huge believer that the world is changing. We are going through massive changes in our society, in our business, and that is impacting the way meetings are put together. So the world is changing. But just because somebody has a new idea doesn't mean we should do that idea. In a separate area, I was involved in a conversation where the debate was about follow-up notes if you're on a job search and you go through an interview. Should you send a handwritten note or an email? Now, I don't understand why this was such a heated debate, but it was going back and forth on this discussion page online, and somebody asked me how old I was. And I'm not shy. I said I was 46. And the other person was like 29, said, well, obviously that's why you're defending the handwritten note, because you're old school. I'm young, I'm hip, I'm cool, said my opponent in the discussion. And he said, email is better because it's fast and it's new, and nobody will consider you old school. To which another person came in and said, email's old. What about text? Text is newer. Text is faster. Why don't you text your thank you to the person who interviewed you? In fact, why don't you text it during the interview while they're interviewing you? And, of course, we all laughed because that would be ridiculous in the middle of an interview to text somebody and say, THX for interviewing me. but it was new and it was fast. So just because something is new or fast doesn't mean that you need to do that. There's a lot of people who are really screaming that they have to get the best technology around their conference. Like, what's the best app? Now, I think you should be using technology, and there are a lot of good apps out there. But a lot of people are spending money on applications that aren't being used by their conference attendees because they're not in a line with the purpose. They're not lining up with the people. I went to a conference recently, and when you checked in, you got a wristband that had a QR code on it. What you needed to do next was take a picture of it with your own phone, set up an account, go back to your room, log on to a laptop, and fill out all your information so that instead of having to exchange business cards, all you had to do was shove your wrist in front of somebody's face. They could reach into their pocket or purse, pull out their phone, take a picture of your arm, and now you've traded information. Think about that for a second. Do you have a card? Yes, I have a card. Here you go. Doesn't mean that technology was bad, but at the conference I was at, nobody was using it because it was more simple for these people to exchange cards. Plus, it was sort of a group of people who were older and kind of more apt to things being the same. So wearing a wristband and taking out your phone and shooting pictures of each other's arms to exchange email wasn't the best thing. Yet everybody up front thought, oh, this is going to be so cool, it's going to be so cool. I talked to not a single person who used it. So just because it's new doesn't mean it's the right idea for your conference, because there's a lot of new. And in fact, what's new today will be old tomorrow. So don't get caught up in, oh, we have to do it because it's new. Get caught up in, I know my audience, and I know this will really help my audience with what they're trying to achieve. But the two main reasons that everybody tells me that their people attend their conferences are for the learning and the education and for the networking opportunities. And I'll tell you, oftentimes those can be interchangeable as which one's number one or number two. It's about learning and it's about the networking opportunities. These are why people are saying they're coming to conferences. So if that's their purpose, what are we doing to advance learning and networking opportunities? The problem with the networking opportunities is if I was to get 10 of you to send me a note right now that said, what is networking, or what is networking at a conference, and why do people do it? 10 of you would most likely send me 10 different definitions of what is networking at a conference. So there's a lot of preconceived notions of what it means. And one of the problems is sometimes people think, oh, we have great networking because we have a sponsor who pays for open bar for 3 hours. Well, that means that you have a lot of liquored up people. It doesn't mean that you have real connections being made. So to me, the purpose of networking is creating long-term and mutually beneficial relationships between two or more people where everyone who is involved in those relationships succeeds more because of the relationship than they do without the relationship. Now think about most conferences that you attend, maybe not the ones you plan, but think for a minute about the conferences you attend. How many times do you walk away with long-term, mutually beneficial relationships with two or more people where everybody succeeds more because of those relationships than without those relationships? I talk to a lot of people who say a conference that creates that type of connections is rare. But every conference has networking opportunities. Everybody has networking breaks. Everybody has that party where they take everybody to the offsite. And yet, very few people come back and tell me that that's been reached. Now, a lot of attention is put on the learning objectives, and I'm going to talk about that again in a couple of slides. But if those are the top reasons, you can't just say, well, I know how to do learning objectives. I don't know how to do networking. I don't know how to create an experience. I don't know how to get them to feel inside them that wow, so therefore I'll do nothing. And I can't tell you, I can't give you a script as we go through this that says go do X, Y, and Z and you will have success. But I can challenge you to think about, are we paying enough attention to find the ways to really meet the needs of those who are attending? If they're saying they're there for learning and networking, are we really going out of our way to give them both in a powerful way? Are we creating opportunities for them to share experiences with other people in the audience? Because shared experiences are how we build relationships. If you think for a minute, if you're married, did you propose marriage the night you met your husband or wife? Most people say no. If I had proposed marriage to my wife, Sarah, the night I met her, she would have run out of the bar screaming. But you get to a point where a relationship grows by sharing long-term experiences with people, by sharing events. Same thing is true when it comes to, think about your friends. Think about who you went to college with, who you keep in touch with today, or who you went to high school with, who you still go and see every summer. Was that someone who was in a class who you occasionally waved at across the quad, like, hey, how you doing? Or is that somebody who you shared experiences with, where you were there for them in the good times, they were there for you in the good times, but you also were there in the bad times. You shared all kinds of ups and downs of the emotions that make up the experience of being human. This means we have to do the same thing in our conferences. But we only have a couple of days. This mini society only exists for a short time. Sometimes people go, Tom, how do I create an experience? Well, you do it by having things that are emotional. You do things by having things where people feel what's going on. It comes down to the speakers you have, to who's in the audience, to how they're interacting, and to what you're doing. Because shared experiences cannot be beat when it comes to creating that feeling that they had a wow experience. Another thing is, I go to a lot of conferences, both as a speaker but also as an attendee. I go to a lot of conferences. And both for myself and every single person I ask at any conference across industry lines, I don't care if you have neurosurgeons or if you have a bunch of salespeople or anything, left brain, right brain, it doesn't matter. When I ask people, what's the best part of this conference, they always say, well, it's really the hallway conversations. And to me, the definition of a hallway conversation is after you sit through a speech, after you sit through a breakout session or a panel discussion, you walk out into the hallway and you continue that conversation with the people who are around you. So it's not just you sit and you take notes and you sit and you take notes and you sit and you take notes. It's a break, you go get some coffee. You go out into the hallway and you say, what that person just said, here's the way it works in my company. Here's the way it works in my association. And the other person says, yeah, me too. Or no, we do it this way. And you get really deep. So you get the learning. You get that learning. But in the hallway with the other attendees, you get excited. You get down there. You get talking about it. You get to the point where you're chatting about the information you're learning. There have been surveys that say that when people talk about what they've learned, they retain the information more. Plus, when they're chatting with 2 or 3 other 4 other people in a roundtable discussion, just standing around with a cup of coffee, that goes back to being a shared experience. So what happens is not all shared experiences can be planned. Sometimes it's when people are standing on the sidelines and just cheering for what's going on elsewhere and sharing information that they create that hallway conversation. And that's a learning opportunity. But think for a minute. Every conference I go to, in their program, it talks about what you're going to get from this keynote or this breakout, and one of the things is, what are the 3 learning objectives? Now, I know as a speaker, the planners and organizers are always asking me, can you please give me the 3 learning objectives, because we have to put those in the program. That's very common. It's very useful because people know they get more out of it than just reading what is a title. However, it's not just the breaks that provide learning opportunities. It's everything that provides learning opportunities. So are we thinking about putting those learning objectives around the breaks? Are we encouraging people to talk about what they just learned? Are we encouraging people to find people who went to a different breakout session and share with them the 2 things they learned in the one they were in and getting 2 things from the other one that someone else was at? Because you can't be in 2 rooms at once. And most conferences don't have everything recorded when it comes to the breakout session, so when you have to pick between 3 or 4 tracks, you get nothing. But are we putting objectives in of split up with the people who you came with, go to different things, and then meet and share those nuggets? If you didn't come with 3 or 4 people, get some buddies in advance and say, afterwards, during the break, let's meet and share what we learned. Those objectives should be in there because it's not just about the actual speech itself. It's about what do people take out of that room and what are they doing with it to make sure that they retain it. Now, I don't know about you, but when everybody says the best part of this conference is the hallway conversations, that means we need to raise the attention that we're taking as planners, as speakers. We need to take it to the next level in what are we giving them to make those hallway conversations even better. Now, your association, maybe nobody ever says that the hallway conversations are the best part. But if they are saying it, Are you paying attention to it in the planning side? Because if that's the best part, that's off your agenda. If your people's best part is off their agenda, is off your planned agenda, that's not good or bad, but it's something that you need to pay attention to, and it's something you need to think through from the standpoint of an organizer, is what am I doing? If that's their best part, don't kill it. Encourage it. Take it up a notch. How do you make it even better? And how do you take the non-planned part of the agenda and wrap yourself around it? And WOW isn't an accident. So the conferences that are the most successful, the conferences where people are staying up until 3 in the morning, having a great time the next day, they can't wait to get back downstairs to get to the learning sessions, even though they've been up with their friends all night, and who are making their reservations to come back next year before they leave the presence of the physical meeting this year. Those are WOW experiences, but that doesn't happen by accident. It goes back to starting with your venue selection. If you're at a venue that doesn't flow for the way your event works, it kills people. If people are coming up on stage and saying things like, hey, blah, blah, something works, I hope it works better than the Wi-Fi in this hotel, ha, 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 and it gets a big laugh, that's not good. Because if people are having trouble with the venue, they're having trouble with the hotel, the elevators are slow, the meeting space is too far spread out, they can't get there in time, so they're having to miss their break, that undermines their experience. So it starts with that. Same thing is true of the agenda. If the agenda isn't set up to a way that it flows well so that when they're trying to pick what they want to go to, the things that would interest people in marketing aren't all in the same hour. The things that would interest people, about the technology side of what you do are all in the same hour, so now they have to pick. All those things can undermine the WOW experience. So you have to think those things through. How is a room laid out? I spoke recently in a room that was too big, because what they did is they tried to maximize everything in one room. It was going to be more efficient. So they had their trade show, their meals, their speakers, all in the same room. This ballroom probably could have sat 3,000 people if it was all chairs. There were about 300 people in the keynote that I delivered. Now, they had the trade show spread around the side. That was fine, but it meant that the volume had to be up. So it was like I was screaming at 300 people the whole time because the volume was cranked to make sure the acoustics worked in the room. The other thing is they set the people way back to the middle. They should have been way up against the stage. It should have been much more intimate with the speaker. But because they were using it for lunch right afterwards, they were going to have people go on break and they were going to reset the tables, they didn't pack people in tight to the stage. And it was as if I was giving a speech standing in New York City speaking to a group of people in London. They were so far away, there was never any connection with the speaker. And I'm a little bit biased because I really think your speakers, I don't care what type of event it is, I think your speakers set the tone for everything. We spend so much time at conferences sitting and listening to speakers. The speakers have to be able to not only provide information, but to encourage people, to inspire people, to get people going. I'll tell you something funny. There's a big debate in the meeting world, and that is content versus style when it comes to a speaker. And I've had these conversations. I spoke in an event where somebody who worked for the company came up to me and said, my sister has to know you. She plans 2 major events for, I won't say the name of the company, but it's a brand name technology company. He goes, my sister plans these events. She's always looking for speakers. I'm going to introduce you. He calls his sister right there on the phone and says, oh, my gosh, you have to talk to this guy. He was wonderful. He hands me the phone. I get on the phone, and she says, what type of technology do you speak about? And I said, well, actually, I speak about the human type of technology. I talk about how to get people at your event more engaged with each other, and I weave it in through the whole thing. And I gave her my whole background, and she said to me, oh, no. We don't do anything that isn't heavy technology. Our people have told us on the survey that they don't want style. They only want content. She goes, in fact, we're not to hire anybody who would identify themselves as a motivational speaker. And I said, well, I don't understand. And she goes, if you would call yourself a motivational speaker, and I don't call myself that, but I do use motivation, she said, then we don't use you. We don't want anyone who's professional or seasoned in speaking. And I asked her, I said, what's the opposite of motivation? There was a long pause, She didn't understand what I was asking. I said, what is the opposite of motivation? She didn't have a word. Demotivation was the best we could come up with, and then we talked it through, and we came up with sucks the energy out of the room. And I said, so what you're saying is you go out of your way to look for speakers who are as far away from motivation as you can, and you've just told me that the opposite of motivation is sucks the energy out of the room. And she laughed, and she said, gosh, when you put it that way, it must be boring to sit in our chairs. She goes, but we ask people specifically, do you want high content or do you want soft skills training? Well, of course, if you phrase it like that in your survey, who sits around and says, oh, yes, please give me something fluffy? I would love something fluffy, something light. Don't give me anything to learn. It's all in how you phrase the question. Everybody up front is going to tell you, oh, yeah, we want content. Oh, it's all about content. But when they're sitting there for a 90-minute presentation and the person who is giving the speech has his back to them because he's trying to read 12-point font, and he is speaking in a very monotone voice and citing every survey that he's ever read in every trade publication since 1947, the people want to stick needles in their ears. We've all sat through presentations like that. We've done it live. We've done it on webinars. If people are sitting there listening to somebody, no matter how smart he is, and they want to stick needles in their ears, it's hurting your chance for a wow experience. Now, my argument is I don't know why we're arguing content versus style. I'm not saying throw out content. For gosh sakes, we want to have learning. We've got to have content because that purpose that people come for is learning and networking, which I include with experience. So you don't have to have a tug-of-war between which one should we have. You should be demanding both. Think about that for a minute. When you're choosing the speakers who are going to set the tone for your whole event, you should be demanding both. The speaker should have good content that's going to teach your attendees, but that speaker had better have the experience on stage to be able to captivate an audience to want to take action. There has to be that piece of motivation, or they sit there hoping to God he will say, thank you very much, and walk off the stage. So don't underestimate choosing speakers. And I'm biased. I told you that up front because what I do for a living, I'm not going to be the right speaker for everybody, so I'm not trying to sell me. But I'm telling you there are thousands of people out there who are professionally trained, who are brilliant in the areas that you need taught to your people. It's not a commodity item. It's not, well, that person costs $5,000 and the other person costs $7,000, because there's no way for you to be able to tell who's going to set the tone for your audience. You have to put a lot of time and a lot of effort into vetting those speakers. Another thing is, it's not just about your scheduled events. I already talked about how hallway conversations aren't really scheduled events. They're sort of off-the-cuff other things that go on. I call them pirate events. Sometimes they're hosted by sponsors. Sponsors say, hey, there's not much on the agenda on Tuesday night. We're going to take 100 people to dinner. Now, during the Boom Boom days, people actually wrote into their contracts to sponsors who were going to be vendors at their conference, you cannot do any event while we're doing this the day before, the day after, because everything was going to be sponsored. Everything was going to be money into the organization hosting the event. And that was great. Everybody made a lot of money. There was always things on the agenda that were busy. As the economy has turned around, what's happened is there's not as many sponsors. I know not all of you experience that, but I know some of you do. So there's not as much money. If there's not enough money, maybe you can't do a dinner every night. So Tuesday becomes dinner on your own. But they've left the clause in the contract that says nobody can do any what I call pirate events, sort of tag-on events. That leaves a lot of people with nothing to do at your conference. Now, some people are naturally organizers. They'll run around and go, hey, what are you doing? We're going to go out to dinner. Hey, let's get a group of 10 people. Hey, I'm going to call a taxi right now. Oh, let's cram 9 people in our taxi. And everybody has a great experience. They go off to dinner and they come back. Other people look at dinner on your own as, well, I guess I can order room service. Or they look up, oh, hey, my friend from college lives in Cleveland. I'm going to go see her. And they call up, and their friend comes, picks them up, drives them away from the hotel by themselves. Their experience is no longer part of your event. So if they have a wow time with that friend from college, that doesn't get attributed back to y'all. So what happens is that non-scheduled events should be encouraged. Now, you don't necessarily want them against your big party, so maybe your clause says you can't do them on Wednesday night when we have our big street party. But the rest of the time, you should be encouraging vendors, but also the members. If you're an association, you should be encouraging members to start their own little groups. Now, I'm against cliques, but I'm for groups. I participate as a member in a national association, and the National Association had a lot of people who were older than I was at the time that I joined and older than a lot of new members. And so a group of us realized that, hey, there's some differences in the world for Generation X and Generation Y. We like things, we experience things a little differently than the baby boomers and those older than the baby boomers. And so what we did is we formed our own subgroup. It wasn't there to take away from the association. It was to have a peer group. Well, now, 5 years later, they get more attendance from about 100 people who come to see each other because we've gotten to know each other. We've built friendships. We've become wow. And it's not a competitive organization. It's part of the organization. We don't exist without it. Nobody can be part of the Generation X, Generation Y group unless they're a member of the national organization, and we are strict about that. There is no, well, he doesn't support the National Association, but he's really cool, so he can be part of it. Because we do breakout things throughout the year. We'll hop planes and get together to share best practices with each other. We'll get together just for fun. And only people who can be part of it are people who are part of that national organization. It's not scheduled by the association. It's not even, well, I guess now it is sanctioned. Originally it wasn't even sanctioned by the organization, but it was a group of people who got together and did their own thing under the umbrella of the conference. They had an open lunch one day, and we said, can we have a separate ballroom? We'll go through the buffet. We'll all meet together. Boom. It's one of the most fun times I have at this national annual conference is this little non-scheduled subgroup for people who were born 1965 or later. And it's good for the organization because the younger people are excited to be there and to be part of it. So it's a win-win thing when people aren't always part of the main program, but they're there underneath trying to make sure that the whole event is good. And this mini society doesn't just happen during the 3, 4, 5 days. It starts online and continues online and lives online during the event. And online can be a lot of things. You can have your own site. You could have a Twitter handle and a hashtag. You can have a Facebook or a LinkedIn group where people get together who are part of your annual conference and all year long share ideas, share thoughts, and stay in contact with people. Because out of sight is out of mind. And yet, if you're constantly looking and seeing things being talked about by people of this community, all of a sudden when it comes time to register for that event, you're more apt to want to go if you've never gone before, and you're more apt to come back if you have been. The other thing is, during the event, you should be encouraging everybody to be on Twitter talking about it. If you're a trade association type group, you should make sure that that hashtag matches up with something to do with your trade association so that people follow it. I was at a convention just this week, and tons of people who weren't able to go were responding saying, keep the Twitter handles and keep the Facebook posts coming because I'm learning things by logging on and watching it. Now, there was a time when we were afraid this online stuff was going to stop registrations because people would be like, well, why should I pay to go to the conference if I can just watch it all online? Even with live streaming of certain speakers, people are like, well, we can't stream our keynote because why would anybody pay to come? Because sitting in your room looking at a computer is not the same as sitting in an audience with 1,000 people watching the same speaker. It's an entirely different experience, and most people know it. So there's a time and a place for everything, but use the online world to promote that event and make it a wow for someone who didn't even come, because that means they'll come next year. And everybody on your organizing committee, and I know that everybody on this call is probably structured a little bit differently in who and how your event is organized. Everybody who is involved, whether it's a single planner to a committee with 100 people where everybody's got their finger in the pie, everybody must be encouraged to think like an entrepreneur. Because if you're not, you have a lot of competition. It's just going to be blah. And I don't think anybody wants to be blah. I don't think there's a single person who says, oh, yeah, I want our conference to just be dull. Every year I want it to be exactly the same. Oh, we don't want anyone to say wow, because wow is too exciting. I was at an event. They had sort of an alternative learning area. This woman came in. She was trying to figure out where she should go during the breakout. And I said, oh, in this room, there's a couple little discussion tables with some industry leaders. There's a little stage over there where people are going to give TED-style 15-minute talks. Over here, there's like a Starbucks where you can grab a cup of coffee and sit and talk to a few friends. And she goes, well, what if I don't like that little discussion table? I go, then you can get up and move to the other. Nobody's offended because everybody knows that people learn differently, so you can just kind of hover. You can walk around. You can go over to the stage. And she looked at me and said, I'm the type of person who would do much better in just a standard breakout person with one person talking at me for an hour. She was petrified to try anything new. Well, okay. I told her, go right next door. There's a great conversation. Go to the other breakout session. Some people don't want new, and no matter what you do, even if you offer it to them, they're not going to experience new, and you could slap them in the face with a wow experience, and they'd be like, I'm more comfortable with blah. But that's not most people. Most people want something that causes them to think and to get sort of out of the box. And so you have to think like an entrepreneur, because entrepreneurs create new things. They grow things. When I think of the definition of an entrepreneur, my personal definition is they create stuff and they grow it. Create and grow, create and grow, create and grow. If nobody in your association is saying we should be creating and growing around our event, what's the opposite of create and grow? Leave the same and shrink? I don't think that's what you're looking for. But at the same time, you don't want to copy everything exactly. You don't want to copy everything that some other association is doing and just say, oh, their agenda worked. That was a lot of fun. Let's take it and put it in here. You know, you don't want a speaker who speaks in your industry a lot to come and just give the same canned talk they've given to 3 other associations. There's a lot of speakers out there who have one talk. And they don't talk about anything new for the group that's going on in front of them. And if you've seen them once, if you've seen them twice, you don't need to see them a third time. That's not wow. So you need to make sure that things that are good are being inspiring, not directly copied. So the picture that I have on this slide, I really thought a lot about what image do I put here. I was going through my own personal pictures, looking at different things. What is a great example of copy but change? And last year, in 2011, I went vegan for 6 months. I actually started with Lent, which was about 2 months, and then kept it going, kind of, for the rest of the next half of the year. Well, it was hard, but I'll tell you, I actually liked Tofurkey. Now, Tofurkey has no meat in it. It's totally vegan. It's probably soy. I don't know what was in the ingredients, but it was Tofurkey. But it was seasoned to taste just like Italian sausage. So when I would make paella, I could chop it full of Tofurkey. Now, I'm going to be really honest with you. Was it as good as a greasy piece of sausage? Well, come on, no. But I'd made a commitment to be vegan. So I took something where somebody had looked at, ooh, sausage is good. Let's change it and make it work for people who are vegan. And it didn't suck. In fact, it was pretty good. And so the question is when you see something that another conference is doing, do you just copy it and just shove it right in, square peg, round hole, and say, it worked for that association, we're going to make it work for us. Thud. Worked for that trade show, we're going to make it work for our trade show. Thud. You could. Or do you say, what parts of that are important? What are the spices? What's the texture? How do we take the spices and the texture and make them work for an audience that can't have or that won't work for? You want to be Tofurkey. You don't just want to come up and say, we're going to be just like TED. And I'm sure most of you know what a TED conference is. Their videos are some of the most watched videos on the web, and they've been extremely popular the last 5 years. And more meeting planners tell me, oh, we're looking for someone to do a 15-minute talk, 18-minute talk. And I say, great. Why is that the time limit? We're going to be just like TED. Well, what does that mean? Well, TED conferences are great, and their videos, we love to watch them. So we're going to be just like TED. We're getting all our speakers to do 15 to 18-minute talks. Well, there's more to a TED conference. There's more to a TED talk than just the 18 minutes. That just happens to be what they picked. Yes, you get 3 speakers in an hour, and that's great, but the average person who is asked to speak on the TED stage at an international TED conference, I have read, spends 40 to 60 hours of preparation for their talk. Now, the other thing is there's a lot of TED Talks between TED and then their TEDx brand that are out there. They're not all great. We see the great ones. We see Brene Brown. We see Brene Brown. We see some of these other things that get pushed around the web, and we think, God, those 3 videos were great. And we make the assumption that all TED Talks are great. No, but all TED Talks, the person puts in a lot of time preparing, and therefore, very few of them stink. So all of a sudden people think, wow, and I ask, are you going to ask every one of your presenters, oftentimes they're not paid, oftentimes they're industry people who are doing it for free, are you going to ask them to put in 60 hours of preparation into that 15-minute talk? And they say, well, no, they would never do that. Well, you're taking a square peg and cramming it into a very round hole if you're thinking, but we're going to give them 15 minutes and they're going to be great. Maybe. Maybe not. What I saw one organization do last year at their trade show that I thought was great was they wanted to take those short talks, but they knew that their people wanted deeper learning, so they had all of the instead of doing one keynote for an hour, they did 3 keynotes in an hour, so everybody had 18 minutes back-to-back, 3 very big different topics, boom, 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 and then all of those people deeper dive breakout sessions later in the day. So it wasn't just the 15 minutes. Everybody did an hour and a half later in a breakout session. So if you really liked what you got in that nugget up front in the beginning of the day, you could go to a breakout room, spend an hour and a half going deep. That was taking the idea of TED and making it work for this show's needs. So don't just copy. Copy with the intent of making it work for you. And you've got to, whoops, what just happened? I just skipped a slide. Oh, no. You got to brainstorm this stuff. You got to brainstorm this stuff with everybody. And sometimes when I talk about this stuff, people go, oh, yeah, we do that. I don't think most people do. I don't think most people spend a lot of time all year long brainstorming ideas about what they could do. Maybe occasionally they sit around and say, anybody seen anything good? Great, what do you got? A couple things. I mean brainstorm always. I mean brainstorm constantly. I mean you should be brainstorming during your event. What can we do next year? After your event, what can we do? And right before. If your agenda is locked down 6 months out with no room to wiggle, it's kind of cookie cutter because new ideas might come up right before. I had one group looking at using me for something, and it was going to be very different, and we went way down the road, and they came back to me and said, our trade show is not ready to be different. Now, they had told me that their numbers had declined 10% a year for 3 years. And I said, well, when are you going to be ready to try something different? And they said, later. But I said, you said that you're in trouble, and nobody's comfortable with new ideas. Well, that's because they don't sit around and make new ideas a priority. Now, that doesn't mean that one idea was the right idea, but what new idea are you doing? You should always be asking the attendees, not just what the event, but what other things have you attended that you have seen work so you can get that idea that you can copy but different. You should be asking the attendees' spouses and guests and other people who come, not just polling the attendees for ideas, because those other people, they might not be from your industry. They might not be going to your trade show except as the spouse of somebody else. They might come from an entirely different industry, which causes them to look and go, hey, that's a good idea, or hey, I brought this idea from a totally different industry, and then you can tweak it. Your vendors are sponsoring your competitors' conferences. They like them too, and that's okay. Ask them, what are you seeing at other conferences? How many trade shows a year are you doing? What are you seeing other people do? Not just in the trade show hall, but with meals, with breaks, with offsites, with speakers. What have you seen that have made you say, wow? The best vendors participate in the trade show. They don't just set up their booth, stand there and say, how's that show going for you? How's that show going for you? To everybody who walks by. Now, a lot of them do that, but the best ones, and you know the difference, the best ones are at the keynotes. They're at the meals. They're sitting up late at night talking to people. Those are the people you go to and say, at other events you go to, what's happening? Talk to everybody on your board, your staff, your volunteers, and make sure that part of their mindset is they're always looking for ideas. And again, going back to the whole thing about the speakers, if you're using professional speakers who are speaking 30, 40, 50, 80, 100 times a year, some people out there are speaking 100-plus times a year, we're seeing a lot of stuff. We're seeing a lot of people do a lot of things right. We're seeing a lot of people do a lot of things wrong. Ask. Most speakers like to talk. We don't get into this industry because we want to, if you ask, what have you seen? Nothing. Most speakers who do it professionally, many of them love the industry. We feel that we're part of the meetings industry. Now, there's some out there who are like, I get paid a lot of money and I go and speak. I don't like these people. I don't like doing it, but it's lucrative. You can tell the difference on that, too, with just a few questions of how long have you been speaking? Why do you like to do it? A couple of questions. Once they start showing you that they have a passion for the industry, not just their own speech, when they tell you they have a passion for the industry, start asking them details because the smart ones are watching everything. Some fly in, get in the car, give a speech, get ushered out the back and fly away. They're not noticing anything. But some are watching stuff. Even if you don't utilize outside event planners, you should be networking with them. You should be talking to them. What are the cool things for offsites in the cities that you're going to? there's someone in that city who plans stuff. Even if you're not looking to hire somebody, they'll share ideas. Most people are nice people. They'll share ideas if you reach out. The venue employees are fantastic, and not just the sales manager who sold you the contract to come to that venue, but the waiters and the waitresses. They're in that room night after night after night. That room is being reconfigured in different shapes. That room is being configured with different stages. They have different types of programs. A lot of these people are brilliant. If you start asking them questions, the person serving your table, they'll tell you, oh, we had a trade show in here 3 weeks ago, and here's what they did. Boom, there's your idea. There's your spark of inspiration. Talking to your peers, participating in groups like TSNN where your peers are, going to their events, and actually sitting side by side with other people who plan the type of trade shows that you plan and asking them questions. If you have never been to a TSNN event or a similar type event to hang out with your peers to ask questions, you're shortchanging yourself. And I had someone tell me, I don't like to hang out with other event planners. Well, why not? You should want to hang out with other event planners because they know your pain. They know what your day is like, and if they like you, they're right there to give you ideas, or if you have a disaster, they're right there to tell you how to get out of it. And finally, you should be brainstorming with strangers on a plane. I don't care who it is. Anybody who is in business who attends conferences, the question should be, what's the best thing that you have seen at a trade show? What's the best, most unique thing that you have seen at a trade show? Or in a perfect world, what would you like your industry trade show to give to you? Ask them one of those questions. People will answer. You'd be surprised what you get. I ask people all the time for questions about my industry who work in totally different worlds. Sometimes they give me ideas that are dumb. That's okay. Or I think they're dumb. They're probably brilliant, and I'm not smart enough to tell the difference. But sometimes they tell me things, I'm like, ooh, I got to go write that down, or I got to go read that book, or I got to find out who that person is. Always be brainstorming. Always, always, always be asking people for ideas because you never know where it's going to come from. And then you've got to take some risk. You can't be safe in this business. You've got to take risks in this business, or you can't win. I was at a conference in Las Vegas just last week. I had my 15-year-old daughter with me. Well, my 15-year-old daughter can't go to the casino, so I never went to the casino. We're leaving Vegas, and she says to me, I was hoping while we were here maybe you'd win some big money. Maybe you would have hit a jackpot. And I told her, you got to play if you want to win. And I couldn't play because I wasn't going to leave you by yourself. And I didn't take any risk. If you don't take the risk, you can't hit the jackpot. Same thing is true in this business. And if you just want to stick your toe in the water, if you're just going to stick your toe in the water, it's going to suck. If you want to try something new, but you're not going to give it like the main area where people are going to see it, if you're going to put it 3 floors down where people have to get in an elevator and ride to the bottom, no one's going to do it. They're going to go to what's safe and easy. They're going to go to the main breakout session. If you just give lip service to, we're trying fresh stuff, but you don't want to have anybody on the main stage talking about that fresh stuff because, the main stage time, that's precious. We can't let anybody on there except for this. It's going to suck. If all you do is say, hey, we're going to get up and give awards to the old-timers who've done all these things who are famous, and we're going to have little clicky pats on the back, it's going to suck. Find the up-and-comers. Praise the new people. And if you're going to do it, put them right there dead center. If you play it safe, it won't work. You have to take the risks. You can't stick your toe in the water, or it's just going to be a boring, boring meeting. Now, the thing that always comes up, and we're getting to the end here, is how do I deal with the obstructionist? Tom, I love it. You're all inspirational. You've given me a couple of ideas, but, of course, a lot of what you talk about is very simple. But if I was to go back to my boss and say, we should try something different at our conference, he'll say, no, we can't do it that way. That Tom guy is really energetic. I'm sure he was bouncing around on stage or on the phone call, but, he doesn't understand our business. Our attendees are so sophisticated. They're different than all those other things. And there's naysayers everywhere. People always ask, how do I deal with those naysayers? Have a meeting early on, maybe right after your last meeting, where you say, is our conference the best conference available to every single person who could possibly attend, or could we do better? Make everybody answer the question. Nobody gets to sit there and look at their BlackBerry. iPhones go away. Everybody participates. It goes around the room. Are we the best, or could we do better? If everybody says we're the best and you believe it, well, I don't know why you logged on to this call. But if everybody has to step up and say, I am on this committee and I do not believe we are the best, now they have ownership. The second question is different automatically bad? If someone in this room comes up with an idea that we think is wacky, are we going to look at them weird? If they're an employee, are we going to fire them or chastise them? Or are all ideas good ideas? Put it out there. If there's an elephant in the room that nobody wants to talk about it. Put it up there up front. And then ask, as a committee, are we brave or timid? Now, I worked with a group, and I told them to ask this, and the lady said she was scared to death. And the answer that came back was, we're timid. She couldn't believe it. She asked the group, are we brave or are we timid? And they all agreed they were timid. She couldn't believe it. She thought nobody would admit to it. And I joked with her. I said, now, go back to your next meeting and say, are we willing to put that in the program? Please come to our conference. Our meeting planner, our meeting committee is so timid to try anything new, we're going to do exactly what we've done for the last 3 years, and we are proud of it. Who would put that in their brochure? If you're not going to put it in your brochure, talk about it in private, behind closed doors, and then find a way to get untimid. I don't know if untimid is a word, but get over it. And then finally, do we really care about the people who are attending, or is it about keeping our jobs, keeping our things, getting the polite little hand clap? Which is it? If we really care about wowing them, if we really want to do something that says wow, what are we going to do? And my challenge is, if you're asking yourself, yeah, my conference isn't a wow, then don't settle for anything less than at least trying to get to wow. You can't make it get to wow, but you can try darn hard. Now, I went a little bit long. We got about 5 minutes for questions, and I know that we've had questions come in because I see them on my little screen, so I'm going to go right over to this. And let's see if I have a really good question. What are some of the mistakes you have seen when an event has been tired? What are some of the events you've seen when an event has tried too hard to be wow? QR codes was a great example at a lot of these things. So yes, so there was a question about, what are some of the things you've seen when they've tried too hard? I've seen a lot of people invest a lot of money trying to be wow and fall flat. But where I've really seen people fall flat isn't that they tried too hard. It's that they tried too hard without really giving it the real estate up front. They're going to have a new program, and they just put it on page 32 of the program, or they send it in an email that, we're doing this special thing, at a certain time, and it's just barely mentioned. If you're going to do something new, stand up on the main stage and tell everybody, we're doing something new. We don't know if it's going to be good, but we're going to try this. Here's where it is. Here's how you get there. If you're not up there with energy, telling them about what is new, why it's new, and admitting it could suck, but come anyway, let's try it together. If you're not willing to do that up front, nobody's going to go because people do not read your program. I know you think they do. They do not read the emails that you send them. You could send out a text to everybody in the audience during a program. They're not going to read it. We're a glancing society. We glance at things. There's so much information coming, we glance. It used to be just get a good headline. I don't even read the headlines anymore. So I would say that the biggest thing is that it's not trying too hard with money. It's they've fallen flat with some stuff. But if you're going to try something new, tell people, it's new, we're trying it. Give us your feedback. Then you can't fall flat. Because if you told them, hey, it may not work, there is no downside to that. Another thing is how important is it for events to constantly be asking their attendees what needs to be improved and changed? I'll tell you that's a great question because afterwards we always get those surveys. No one fills them out. I get them as speakers because they cut out the piece where people talk about me and send it to me. 1,000 people at the trade show, 4 people left comments. Now, fortunately, they're often very good, but 4 people out of 1,000 left a comment? So we're asking. People aren't responding. That's why I'm big that you can't just be asking once in a while. You got to be asking in person. We get so many surveys and emails that they're all just 4 or 5, 4 or 5, 4 or 5, 4 or 5. So I think that it has to become personal. I think you really have to get personal. And then it says, Tom, fourth question from somebody is, what do you think most events are missing in the wow category? And I'll tell you, I think what they're missing is the fact that they're not trying. I honestly think that people are missing the wow because they're scared to try for wow. They're scared to really put something out there because they're afraid if it flops, nobody will come back. I'm not saying throw out everything you do that works in lieu of just trying new stuff. But if you're not trying to work in some new stuff and let people know we're in this together, our purpose is you. We did this for you to have a better experience. Let us know how it's working is better than fill out this survey 1 through 5 and tell me if you have any ideas for next year. So I think that's where we're sort of missing on that is in that section. And the last question that I said here said that, you said that speakers set the tone for everything, but because of budgets, we don't have money to pay speakers. How do we find great ones for free? There are great speakers out there who are out there speaking because they love the business. They're out there because they're new to the business. They're out there because they're there to promote their own agenda. They speak because they're a consultant. They want the people in your audience to sell. But you got to know what their purpose is. If they're there to sell to your audience and that's their purpose, you're going to have a different outcome than if they're there to promote stuff. The other thing is there's a little bit of you get what you pay for. There is an advantage to using paid speakers because this is what they do for a living. Speaking it's the number one fear people have is standing up and speaking. It's a skill, and it's a learned skill. And my mantra about speaking is just because someone is smart or they have done something cool, it does not mean they belong on your stage. I'm going to say it one more time. Just because someone is smart or they've done something cool doesn't mean they belong on your stage. And when you're asking a speaker to discount their fee, bring them some value. What other stuff can you bring to them? Going to a speaker and saying, we have a limited budget or no budget, would you like to speak at our event, is different than coming and say, we have a limited budget, but we'll give you a full-page ad in our program, or we'll give you a chance to write for our magazine, or we're going to be videotaping this. We have a crew videotaping the whole thing. We will pay to get you a copy of that video so that you can use it in your promotional materials. If you're going to ask somebody to cut their fee, what value are you bringing back? So, a lot of speakers won't do it for free, but there are good people out there, but it's about vetting. Who do you know who has seen these speakers in your industry who do speak for free? You have to put in the time to peel back the onion, know their purpose, and then talk to people who've seen them and ask if they were good. So I think that fills up all the questions that we have, and that takes us right to the top of the hour. I'm going to refresh my questions one more time, and I think that's all the questions that we got in here. So I am going to, at this point, go back to the slides and thank you all very much for joining us. It has been a real pleasure to be here today and a pleasure to speak on behalf of TSNN. I find them to be a fascinating group to work with. They've been very good to me, and I really enjoy working with them. They put on some great programs. And thank you for joining us for creating wow ideas for your next event. And please check back on the tsnn.com webinars for a recording of this session, but also to see who they're going to have next month. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.